Hey everybody, we are live on Wednesday, the 14th of February, and just going to get started in a few minutes covering how to set up a remote volume in Craft 3 using Amazon S3. That's what we'll be covering today, and then maybe anything else that comes up, touch on that as well. But that's the plan for today. If there's anyone out there, you can hop in the chat if you would like. Going to just check on my stream. Looking good. All right, so we'll get started in just a minute or so. And what I'm going to do is take this site that we've built up to this point called Crafty Blog, and there's a series of live streams I did where I built this up from scratch. It's a really simple site. There's not much to it, but the idea was to cover just the fundamentals of how this, how you can build very quickly build a site up in Craft 3. So that's what we're going to work on. And if you're not familiar with it, it's a real simple blog. There's, a big image in the back. There's a title and content. Pretty straightforward. One time, I think it was last time we did the nested nav here from the structure section. And that is what we'll actually going to build on. The image piece is what we're going to build on. So that would be on the blog posts. There's this background image, and we have these stored in Craft via a asset volume called images. You can see we have a couple images here that we used as a test. So it looks like that was last week when I did this, or added those. And I want to convert this over to using Amazon S3 as the source, and that way the images are separate from the server, and we don't have to worry about migrating images and things like that. So that's what we're going to do. Now I'm going to actually step through on the S3 side, obviously creating the bucket, but also creating a group, a policy, and the user. And I'm going to do that because I want to, if I'm going to show S3, I want to make sure I show a way of doing it that doesn't just show like inputting the master account credentials, because you don't want to do that. You want to segment out how you permission access to all sorts of things in AWS, but specifically in S3. If you're going to have a bucket with some images for a blog like this, you want to have obviously a single bucket for that, but then also you want to have a group, and then you also want to have a policy for that group, like what they can access, and ideally like just that bucket is all they would be able to access. So we're going to cover that. So it's going to be a little bit more in depth. That's not related to Craft, but I think it's at least important to demonstrate that. All right, so the first thing that we need to do is install via the plugin store. I'm going to look for S3, and there's the Amazon S3 integration for Craft. This is a first-party plugin that you can get, and we want to install that onto our site. So I'm just running this here locally via Valet. And once that's installed, if I go into settings and then plugins, you can see we have it installed and enabled. And that then gives us access, oops, let me go back into settings to assets. Now we have access when we create or edit a volume. We have now access to an additional type, S3. And when we have some credentials to put in here to connect it to a bucket, we'll do that in just a minute. But we have that all set up now. And on the craft side, the only other thing we need to do is input that. And there's a couple of little maintenance things I like to do and then just test it. There's actually no code changes here because the code works just as is since it's still pulling an asset. It's just on the back end, it's pulling it from a remote volume rather than from a local folder. So on the AWS side, we need to obviously have an AWS account. If you don't have one, you can go to aws.amazon.com and sign up for an account. I won't do that here since I do have a testing account that I use for training. And once you have the account, you can do a lot of things with AWS, especially when you first sign up, you can do for free. So it's nice to be able to explore and play with it. But once you do have an account, you want to log in and then go to the Services tab and find S3, which is under Storage, or you can just search for it. And eventually it will appear over here on the left on your history. So once you're in Amazon S3, you'll get this screen, which is this onboarding screen. And this will allow you to create a bucket, which is really the first thing that you want to do. And then we can start our process of connecting S3 to Craft. So I'm going to create a bucket. I'm going to give the bucket a name. We're going to call it Crafty Blog Images. Now, the one thing with bucket names on S3 is that they have to be unique across all of S3. So you can't do something like images, right? Because that won't work. So make sure it's unique, blog images, and it has to be also a valid DNS name. So things like dashes or no dashes. It has to be able to be turned into a URL without any work on the part of Amazon. So I usually just use dashes. So crafty-blog-images. You want to choose your region. If you're just doing this to test, it doesn't really matter. Just choose whatever your default is. Ohio comes up here for me. If you're in the EU, you might want to choose an EU one. If you're in Asia Pacific, obviously choose that. I'll just leave it to Ohio for now. And we don't have any other buckets that we can copy settings from, so let's go to next. And then here, we have some other things that we can do, like versioning and all of that. We're not going to worry about that for this tutorial since this is pretty straightforward stuff we're doing here. And then we want to manage our users. Now in this case, my default account is going to have access to this, which I'll just leave for now. And we could add an additional account as well, but we actually don't have an account created yet. So we'll just leave that. And then I want to grant public read access. You'll get a big warning here, but we're going to grant read access so the images can actually be accessed. And really probably the proper way to do this is to use like a CloudFront distribution, which sits in front of the bucket. But for now, we're just going to do the most straightforward bucket setup here, where the images are actually being served directly out of the bucket. And then we're going to create the bucket. So here we are. Here's our bucket of images right here. So I can upload some images if I wanted to. I can add some files here. And if I go into my build a blog site here, to web and uploads, there we go. We'll grab these two images that are already in the system and get those. So we're going to pre-populate it with what's already there. And we'll grant read access and then upload them. Now these will be uploaded. And if we reload, we can see that they're both now there. All right, so now we have the two images that were in Craft already. Under here, under assets, these two. We've now just uploaded into S3. That'll just make this transition a little bit smoother. You always want to make sure you pre-populate S3 with everything before you transition. Otherwise, you're going to have images breaking. If you're starting from scratch, then it doesn't matter. But if you're actually transitioning from local folder to S3, you want to make sure you pre-populate the bucket or whatever your source is with all the images and files. All right, so the next thing I want to do is go ahead and start to create the access to this. Like I said before, I'm not going to give my main AWS user, I'm not going to put those credentials into Craft. Those are what I consider those sacred. So I want to create a user specific to just this implementation. So just for the Crafty blog images. And that allows me to segment out who has access to what. So to do that, we need to go to under security, identity, and compliance. There's something called IAM. I call it IAM. I'm not sure if other people call that, but I do. And here, we want to create a user, a group, and a policy. So this is called the identity and access management. This is the way that you give access to resources or to things in AWS via resources. So the first thing we'll do is create the policy because we need to attach the policy to the group. So you can see that there's all sorts of different policies here in AWS for all different services. And if we search for S3, you can see there's even one called Amazon S3 Full Access. And you could actually use this. I could just attach this to the user and they would have full access to all of S3. But that includes all of the buckets, all of the privileges that one would need to manage those buckets. What I'm trying to do, which is essentially be almost just like what my main AWS user has. But what I'm trying to do is narrow the amount of access that the account that we input into Craft has. I want it to be very narrow and specific. So we don't want to do this. We don't want this blanket full access. That's probably not a good policy to have. So we're going to create our own policy. And the first step to that is to choose a service. So we'll search for S3. And then we select our actions. And from here, we want to do all S3 actions like this. And then we're going to choose the resources. In our case, we want to have allow them access to any object, right? But we want to restrict it by bucket. So we need to add the ARN or the ARN. And this is a unique identifier for the bucket. So let me just quickly back out of this, and I'm going to go back to S3 in a new tab so I don't break what I'm doing here. Oops, actually, it's going to make me sign in again. I guess that's all right. It's making me sign in because I'm in sort of private incognito windows here. All right, so now we're in here. So if I click on this, you can see that this is the bucket. If I click on the bucket, you can see I get this copy bucket ARN. So we're going to grab that, go back to here, and add the ARN. And I can just paste it in right here. You can see it gets the name of the bucket. And this is basically just the address, right, to the bucket. Can we add that? So now what we're doing is we're restricting to this bucket and any objects in that bucket, because we want this policy to allow access to all the objects in the bucket. Yes, thank you. Exactly. I'm in private. That's why it made me log in again. Kind of annoying, but understandable. So we'll review the policy. So we got full access, and we'll give it a name. In this case, we'll call it, just call it Crafty Blog S3 Images. Let's do this. So there's all sorts of ways to slice and dice creating pools of permissions on AWS. This just is the simplest approach here. Let's see, did that create it? What happened? All right, there it is. Great, it did. So here's our policy here. All right. That is the policy that we have. So now we're going to go to groups. We're going to create a new group. And we'll call this Crafty Blog Content. So maybe this is like for the Crafty Blog Content team. And I'm going to attach a policy. So I'll just search for Crafty. And then create the group. Now I'm going to go and create a user. Call this Crafty Blog Content. We're going to give them programmatic access, so they get a access key ID and secret key, but we're not going to give them AWS Management Console access. It's not necessary. For permissions, we're going to add them to this group, and that way they also get this attached policy. We'll review that. All right, this is our summary, and then create the user. Great, so now we have the user, and we get the access key ID and the secret key, and this is what we need to input into Craft. So let's go over to here, and we're going to go to Settings, and then to Assets, and go into Images, and I'm going to flip over to Amazon S3, and now we're prompted to put in our key ID and our secret access key. So we'll grab those, which are over here. So this is our access key. Goes there. And our secret key. Which will go here. Now if I refresh the bucket, you should see we get access to that. And we can leave everything else as it is. We get the base URL populated automatically and save. So now, what I like to do is go in, clear any caches, and update the asset indexes. If I go into my entries, you can see that it is now populated with this little thumbnail. You can see it took a second for it to generate because it had to fetch it. And if I go to my site, I should get the image. Let's inspect it. And you can see right here in the URL is accessing it directly from the bucket right there. Now, as I said before, this can definitely be enhanced by using CloudFront and setting up a distribution so it's more of a proper CDN rather than hitting the bucket directly. But for this purpose, it's the most straightforward way to go. If I was doing this for a production site, I probably wouldn't be hitting the bucket directly like this. Again, Amazon, they try to warn you away from giving world read access to buckets. There could be problems with those getting indexed and people running up charges by trying to index your bucket, especially if you have a lot of stuff in there. So they try to warn you away from that, and typically I believe a CloudFront distribution will protect you from that. All right, so now that we have that done, let's test. We know that it's working. Let's go ahead and test creating a new entry and uploading a new image. So I'm going to do a new entry. We'll just say my third blog post. Put in an introduction. And this is the blog body. I don't think I have text expander running. Let's see. I can just pull that up really quick. So I can populate it here. A little bit more content. There we go. Add a category. And then let's add an image. So same interface as before. You can see that we have the two images that are up on Amazon, but I can also upload files here. So let me go grab a different image, an image of espresso, and you can see there it is. And we got the thumbnail. We can just, that's a big image. I probably need to run that through something, but that'll be fine for now. And then we save it. And now if we go to our site, just close my DevTools and reload. Oops, let's go to the home page. There we go. Here's the third blog post. Click on it. And there it comes. It's a big old image. That's probably not such a great thing, but that'll be fine for now. So now we have the image here being served up from S3. So now, anytime the content editors are working on the site and they need to access assets, whether they want to upload directly from here, they want to just throw up a bunch of stuff, it'll go right up into S3. Of course, you can also load it directly in S3 if you wanted to do a larger load or a scheduled load. You could do that, and they will get indexed here in Craft, and they will be available right in Craft as well. So that's how we set up the remote volumes, and we're using S3. And the first step, of course, is to get that plugin. Now, if you look for Google Cloud Storage and Rackspace Cloud Files, these are also two first-party plugins from Pixel and Tonic that allow you to basically do the same thing that we just did with S3, but to do it for either of these services if these are ones that you use. I believe those are the only 3 services that are supported right now. Or if you had something that was, like your own custom CDN, you probably would need to write the connection between those two. So that is how we do the remote volumes in Craft. I don't know how many folks I got chimed in here right now. Let me take a look. All right, looks like we just got one right now. So I'm gonna wrap it up there. And I think next time, we're going to decide what we want to do to this site next time. Just been kind of slowly iterating on this really simple site to kind of show some of the more interesting things that we can do with Craft and especially with Craft 3. All right, so we are going to wrap it up there. Thanks for watching, and I will talk to you guys all on the next stream.